Welcome one, welcome all to the Node. I am Mike, aka Veteran Crypto, and with me as always is David from DeFi University and the Node. How's it going, brother?
My name's not Jeff.
It's
That's
not
that's
Jeff.
yeah, dude. I'm doing great, man. Doing great. Looking forward to the week. I think we've got it's going to be a big week. All the stuff going on in the Middle East. Crude oil this morning up above $100 a barrel. So there's going to be some volatility.
Volatility with the liquidity.
Yeah, something like that. I think I think we're going to see the direction in April. The direction in April last year was pretty negative, so it's going to be an interesting month.
And we're going to dive into that. So Taylor should be here in a bit, and he's going to jump into this topic with us. Those that don't know, Taylor is my brother, but he is also a very successful estate lawyer down in McKinney, Texas, and does a wills, trust, things like that. Him and his business partner, Texas Jeff, who is a licensed financial advisor, are very well versed in TradFi markets. Taylor is huge into DeFi and crypto, real estate, all those things. So he has his feelers out in a lot of different aspects of the economy and things like that. So he's a really good resource. So I'll be excited to have him on. He's usually on Mondays whenever his schedule permits. But today we're going to dive into kind of what we see leading up to these midterm elections and the massive amount of money that's being thrown by both parties at this upcoming election. So it's kind of a game maker or a game breaker when it comes to crypto, because if those that don't remember, with the last administration, when they were in power, they were very anti-crypto. Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler and the SEC were in all-out war. It's called Choke Point 2.0. And they were trying to use regulation by enforcement instead of coming up with clear rules and regulations for the rules of the road for crypto to go by. So basically, they just arbitrarily picked projects to go after and destroy because they had endless funding and lawyers, and a lot of these crypto projects just didn't have the money to fight them. So if they got a Wells notice, they just had to shut their doors. The only person that stood up
they criminalized founders. They criminalized building in crypto and DeFi.
Yeah.
And, in the process, pushed a lot of talent out of the United States. And, that is not the environment that we need. We need to be the place where people want to come in order to build in crypto and DeFi. And as long as the regulation is, not going to allow that here, then you're not going to see builders build in the United States. So hopefully, we don't see those people return to power.
No, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to crypto, yes. I mean, 100%. And I'll give credit where credit is due. Ripple. I mean, using funds from selling XRP, on retail, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars and years fighting the SEC to to fight so that XRP wasn't a security. And I won't go down that road. We can debate the pros and cons of that, but let's jump into the socials real quick. I want to introduce the socials and actually get into this conversation. So if you're watching on X or you're watching on the Arena or something like that, if you want to join the conversation, I mean, by all means, Arena, you have your chat. I know X is kind of weird. You have to have a blue check mark to be able to chat. So if you want to join the conversation, come over to our YouTube channel at @thenode_channel. Here, I'll see if I can blow this up a little bit. There we go. But here you can find all of our shows. So we're actually a network. I wish I would have called it the Node Network, not the Node Channel, because we have a bunch of different offerings. So the Node Channel that you're watching right now, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific. You have Crypto and Chill Tuesday evenings and Friday evenings at 5 p.m. Pacific. You have the Blockchain Report Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 11:30, usually after DeFi High. Today, I believe this week, DeFi Don isn't going to be able to make it. I'm actually thinking about going live later today and talk about some exciting new news about the new Aerodrome platform and the new Aero token. DeFi High is usually immediately after this show at 11 a.m. Or excuse me, yeah, at 11 a.m. Sovereign Soil that I just started with Drew. Super excited about this. It's basically us sharing our experience with emergency prep and homesteading. So he's an avid homesteader and emergency prep guy, and so am I. And we actually live the lifestyle, and I have decades of experience. And so, yeah, we just decided we're going to start sharing that with the community. And starting today, I'm going to start putting together a coaching. If you're interested in somebody helping you with, get started in your prep or refine or fine tune your prep, or homesteading, we're gonna, start maybe like just a little paid service to where you can, get one-on-one time. And also, I'm kind of thinking about having a gated community to where you can, talk to other preppers, other homesteaders, find, mentors, things like that. So more to come on that. And then this is a really good one. The market wrap up that David does, just a quick 15 minutes at the end of the trading day, 4 p.m. On the East Coast when the markets close. And he just touches on what happened, during that day in trading, in the markets. And he's also going to be adding here for the next couple of weeks on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He's going to be working with one of our community members that's been a great supporter of the channel, Ellie, and walking her through and showing everyone. He has a paid coaching service that, but he's going to pull back the curtain and show what he's done for almost 400 clients in the past, and taken them from knowing nothing about DeFi and crypto, or at different levels of experience, all the way up to being in a matter of a couple of weeks, fine tuning their portfolio, educating them on how to properly do DeFi and hedge risk and all those different things, and become successful DeFi investors. So really excited to see that because it's something I haven't even seen.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great fun, Mike. It's really about building a skill set, and you learn best by doing. That's what I've found anyway. So what Ellie's gonna do is she's gonna be sharing her screen throughout most of those sessions, and I'm literally just gonna be annotating the screen, drawing on the screen, saying, hey, let's take a look at this. We're gonna go ahead and execute this swap, and I'll walk her through every step of the way. It's gonna be great.
So you're going to get a behind the scenes look, and it's his coaching is a lot of people in other communities. I mean, they pay 5 figures, well into the 5 figures for this sort of service. David charges nowhere near that, and it's well worth it, because if you're wanting to get up to speed faster, because I know I've been trying to learn DeFi for quite a while. If I wasn't so busy with the channel, I'd probably go through his course too. But we're trying to get a successful channel going here.
Mm-hmm.
But Jeff, he does on Saturday nights. He does a DJ set and has started to have guests on. So he's doing interviews. He's doing tutorials. If you're an aspiring DJ, great show to watch. The Red Pill on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Pacific. This is where we dive into taboo subjects. We talk about politics, we talk about religion, we talk about life. It's all of us getting drunk and debating different topics. There's times where we disagree. We talk over each other and do all that stuff, but at the end of the day, we're all still friends, and we still respect each other. It's basically just to show that you can have differing opinions, you can argue, and still be adults and be friends afterwards. It's kind of a lost art.
As long as you've got the right opinion. You see, that's the thing.
Yeah, you got to agree with me, and then we're okay.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, we got Jay and Ellie. They do a gaming and chill. So I believe it's Wednesdays and Sundays at 8 p.m. Central. So 9 p.m. Eastern. They're going to be doing those. And they just pick a game and play and just kind of talk and shoot the shit. Now, over here on X, you can find us at the Node Channel, all one word. And this is what I think is the most exciting, is the website that David's been working on. So this is a one-stop shop. You can get links to the website that David. You can see that we You can watch us live there, but the links to all of the news that we talk about each morning, I post here. So if you want to do deep dives into, like, if I don't talk, in depth enough about it and you're interested in more, you can actually go and read up on it. DeFi University, 100% no charge. You can go into DeFi University. You can learn DeFi. I mean, you can take the coaching course, but if you want to go through it at your own pace, it's a different type of education. There's quizzes, all of it's there. Again, no charge to you. If you want the private coaching, the one-on-one accelerated program, you can opt into that. And then the AI newsletter we're about to go live with. And this is super sexy. I don't know if I'm going to be able to log into it right now. I know that you were working on logins this morning.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I need to friggin' get to where I can access that. So basically the newsletter is it's AI generated, but what's cool about it is you can pick the assets that you want. So as long as you know the ticker, stocks, crypto, commodities, it gives you the S&P 500, all of those, and you get the news, the trading ranges, and the liquidity pool, ranges for the assets that you are interested in. And you can generate that 24/7, 365, and it's going to pull the data. I think it's, what's the refresh rate? There's like every 10 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, so I've got to slow it down so that you can pull it once a day,
Okay.
but it's going to be real-time data, about 15 minutes old.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I can understand that because it costs a decent amount of money for those cron jobs and stuff like that.
The tokens.
Yeah. Tokens.
Mhm.
So super excited about that. And then Don has been working tirelessly, and David on the store. So you can buy like a lot of the lessons in DeFi High. If one of those people who like to have paper books, you can buy those. We're gonna have hats, mugs, hoodies, all that stuff. Swag for the Node.pro or for the Node channel. So yeah, I mean, pretty excited about all this. I mean, this is all just in the past 3 weeks. We just started all this, and in 3 weeks we've come this far. So buckle up. We figure we'd build in the bear market, and when the bull market comes, then we'll be off to the races. So, with that being said, let's jump into the news. So, first up, in crypto and DeFi, the on-chain surge. We keep talking about Hyperliquid, but it's hard not to with everything that has going on. And full disclosure, I am waiting to get exposure to this. So I'm not shilling my bags here. I want to buy some Hyper, but I'm waiting for a pullback because David says that a pullback's coming. So I'm waiting for that. So Hyperliquid hits milestone. It's reached 100,000 weekly users with volumes exceeding 50 billion. Analysts note that crypto native perpetuals are becoming the preferred venue for trading traditional commodities like gold and oil during weekend gap periods. So are you, I mean, I know that you do a lot of traditional, and that's your roots, is traditional finance. I mean, is this what you're seeing? Is a lot of people moving to these perpetuals?
Yeah, perpetuals are very efficient products that allow you to trade on Hyperliquid just about anything now. You can trade stocks, commodities, digital assets, RWAs a little bit, but those weekly active user counts. So 100,000 weekly active users, that's a big deal. That's a big deal for Hyperliquid. And why the sudden surge? Well, it's because of commodity trading. Just like you said, Mike, it looks like those perps on crude oil, gold, and silver now account for roughly 30% of the total platform volume. Now, here's the thing. You could view that as being a big net positive, because of course it is. But what happens when the volatility leaves crude, gold, and silver? Will those trading volumes remain where they are on Hyperliquid? And, Hype, the token, is definitely one of the higher quality digital assets out there, because Hyperliquid, the protocol, makes a lot of money. It's a casino. It's a big casino.
Share that.
And they return those revenues to token holders. But what happens if a competitor comes along that is much better, or maybe has liquid options markets, or maybe, combines the perps with options with spot, on RWAs like gold and silver and crude, maybe on Bitcoin too, on stocks. What happens if hype actually has to face some real competition? Because
Yeah.
right now it doesn't seem like there is any real competition for hype. So if all of a sudden there's a competitor that comes out there, you could see hyperliquid turn into diaper liquid really quick, man. So yeah, I'm as awesome as hype is, and as great as it is to see all
Mhm.
of this trading volume on chain. Um, Hype is still an extremely volatile digital asset.
Mhm.
And with hype at $38, the pattern that it's putting in above its 200-day moving average looks pretty positive compared to just about everything else in crypto. But the moment that hype has some real competition, man, watch out. So if you're looking for an opportunity, Mike, to buy some hype, I think you're probably going to get it at some point this year. Maybe below $20, something like that.
And I don't want like a huge bag of it. I just want some exposure to it, because I mean I do see potentially some competition, because I mean it seems like for instance Coinbase, love them or hate them, they're building that thing out to be the one-stop shop for anything crypto. Staking, basically a bank account where you can earn yield on your stable coins, as an on-ramp into DeFi, through Aerodrome and Morpho to borrow and lend, using Morpho but natively on Coinbase. They've talked. I've heard talk of perpetuals, and all that kind of stuff on there too. It's tokenized, real world assets, real estate. It's just and they're as you can see in the news, again, love them or hate them, they're knee deep in Washington, and and I know a lot of people are very upset that they're holding up the legislation, and I agree with a lot of people like Dagnum that we're going to have on later this week on Thursday. I agree with his take. Overall, where lobbyists and special interests shouldn't be have the power to hold up legislation, but you know, it's we need to get that out of Washington, and until that happens, this is what's going on a daily basis. This is just in our face right now because it's in the news. I mean, this stuff is happening. Backroom deals are happening all the time in Washington. I personally don't think it should be legal, but it is what it is. And is it self-serving? Absolutely, because Coinbase wants to protect its revenue that it earns from facilitating people staking. But at the same time, they are fighting for us to be able to earn on stable coins. It's only like 4%, 5%, but it's better than the kick in the nuts that the bank gives us. So whatever camp you're in, I can relate. But at the same time, back to hype. I mean, they had Aster. Aster was the kind of the king of the hill, and this goes to David's point. Aster was kind of king of the hill. Those that don't know, that's Binance's perpetuals play, and it seems like that hype has been outperforming it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the hype token itself, the buyback and the
Mm-hmm.
deflation stats are pretty interesting. So, hype does between 1.5 and 2.5 million dollars a day in revenue. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so the protocol daily revenue. Now, the daily buyback in terms of tokens is between 30 and 40,000 hype tokens. So that means the net daily removal of tokens is roughly 8,000 hype tokens per day removed from circulation. So if you project that out over a year, which I don't think is a good idea to do because things move so fast in crypto, but if you were to project that out over a year, we're talking about 2.77 million hype tokens removed from circulation each year. Now that sounds great, right? But anytime I read about a so-called flywheel in crypto,
Mm-hmm.
like what's going on with hyperliquid, it makes me think, okay, well, what happens if that flywheel starts to work in reverse? because for whatever reason in crypto, things move so fast, and sometimes these flywheels reverse.
Yeah.
So right now it looks like Hyperliquid is just going to go to the moon, right?
Mhm.
But um, I would just be cautious because it is still a high volatility digital asset, and I'm just whenever I see a flywheel, it makes me take caution. But they've got this HIP4 upgrade coming soon. So this is for outcome trading. So this is live on their testnet, and
Mhm.
HIP4 is going to introduce outcome contracts. So it's basically like prediction markets 2.0, which is going to be interesting. They're basically trying to recreate poly market on Hyperliquid, which is pretty awesome, man. I'm interested in that.
Well, and another thing is I see this trend happening because I actually just found, and I'm thinking about going live later to talk about it, but a bunch of new information coming out about the new Arrow protocol that's coming out in token, where it looks like they're moving away from the VE Arrow model and they're going to a staking model. You still earn and things like that, but it's not from voting. It's more of it's more of a staking model. So it looks like they might be moving away from that flywheel. I need to do some more digging, but they're moving away from that flywheel model. And again, it's real time. So they're doing away with the epochs. They're doing away with a lot of stuff like that. So excited to see how that evolves.
Yeah, that'll
So
be interesting for sure.
yeah. So FTX Recovery Trust distribution. So it looks like tomorrow, March 31st, the FTX Recovery Trust is scheduled to distribute approximately 2.2 billion to creditors, a massive liquidity event that the market is watching closely for potential quote unquote reinvestment back into top tier assets. What do you think is going to happen with that 2.2 billion?
Oh man, so what we've got to find out is are creditors, these are people who had assets on the FTX platform when it went bust. Are all of these creditors going to receive their digital assets back? I don't think so. And so what they're getting back is, I think they're getting dollars for their digital assets,
Mhm.
but according to the price of those assets back in the bear, in the
Yeah,
depth of the bear, which is like, that sucks so bad, dude.
yeah.
You
So yeah.
you know, so I want to just find out about that real quick. So tell me how creditors are being made whole. Aren't they
So,
getting?
so roughly, you'd be getting about like 25% based off current price, roughly.
Yeah,
So,
in
so if you had one
2022.
Bitcoin, you're going to get the dollar equivalent of 0.25 Bitcoin.
Is that the way that they're doing it?
Well, just roughly, if it's if you get like the depths of the bear, it was like 16K, 15, 16K, something like that, and we're currently at about 70. So roughly, I mean, it's probably it's actually less than that, but I just kind of threw up a number that was easy
So
to.
check it out, Mike. I found it, dude. This is some crazy shit. So if you're an FTX creditor and
Yeah.
you had one BTC on FTX
Mhm.
in November of 2022, when the price was between 16 and 17,000,
Fuck.
yeah, bro. And so the price now is, what is it, 67 or something like that, 67,000.
Yeah.
What you're going to receive is you're going to get back more than 100% of your principal, but nowhere near what those assets are worth today.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, right? Because that FTX exchange was a giant scam.
Mhm.
So they didn't actually hold the assets; it was just like some fugazi. But that means that you're going to get about $20,000 per BTC.
Yeah.
If you were holding Solana, okay, Solana is, if I just hop on over and take a look real quick, trading for 80 something, 84 dollars, you're going to get 19 bucks for that Sol. If you were holding ETH, you're going to get $1,400 for that ETH. So yeah, that is no fun, man. No
No.
fun.
I mean,
Mm-mm.
but I mean, a bit of a silver lining. At least you're getting something.
Yeah, I mean, how many of these different centralized exchanges have we seen blow up and then creditors get nothing?
Yeah.
A lot of them, a lot
Yeah.
of them. Or
Well,
there were a lot of,
Well,
Yeah.
let's roll into the question. You think that how hardcore do you think the majority of that 2.2 billion, those creditors are hardcore enough in crypto after dealing with all that, where they're going to want to reinvest that back into crypto?
I don't know. I don't know, but that's a pretty horrible experience. To
Yeah,
have your money basically stolen from you and
yeah.
then locked up for several years. We're talking about like a 4-year lock, basically. And now you're going to get, if you're lucky, basically 25 cents on the dollar, which is better than zero. But I would hope that if people are going to reinvest into crypto and digital assets, that they self custody. That's the beauty of crypto and DeFi is custody. That's the
Mm,
real difference between TradFi and crypto and DeFi. Is that in TradFi and on centralized exchanges too. If you're on a centralized exchange, you don't actually own anything. You have some type of an IOU from the exchange. But if you self custody your assets, you have custody. Remember, these are bearer assets. So, like cash, if you hold that asset, you are the bearer of it. You custody that asset. But if you hold an asset in a bank, you have basically an IOU from the bank. You are a liability to the bank. And if you hold assets on a centralized exchange, you have an IOU from that exchange. You don't
mhm.
actually custody anything. You don't actually own anything. So the difference for me between TradFi and centralized, crypto exchanges is you don't own anything there. Whereas if you self custody, you actually own it.
Mm.
Big difference, I think. Big difference.
I'm a huge fan of non-custodial, DeFi. But not Scoop Boy comes up with a good question. I don't, now will they have to pay taxes on that refunded money?
I mean, completely arbitrary, man.
Mm.
Like for some authority somewhere to say, hey, you know what, you gotta give me a cut.
Yeah,
Like, what are you talking about?
yeah.
Um, it's so strange when I hear guys in the Middle East in like Dubai, who have lived there their entire lives. That's a jurisdiction with very 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 low taxation rates of taxation, if not zero in many instances. When I hear those guys talk about taxes in Europe or taxes in the United States
Mm.
or taxes in most jurisdictions around the world. They say, well, I don't understand. Like, what exactly do you get for 50% tax rates? Well,
Yeah,
it doesn't compute,
yeah.
and so it doesn't compute for me either. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You know,
Well, the answer to that is what are they getting for our tax dollars? Because that's where a lot of our taxes go is to other countries to um, help with their national defense and all that sort of stuff. So
well,
um,
but it's better than that, though, Mike. You see, we've got to be funding transgender monkey surgeries, okay?
it's true. It's true.
And if we're not doing that in Egypt, then I don't know. That's a really good use of tax dollars.
Or what was it? It was a
It's like, what,
transgender opera in Colombia or something like that.
dude? Yeah, I mean, give me a break, man. That's
I
like
think it was like $25 million or something.
that's
A
clearly
small
some
drop in
type
the
of
bucket,
fraud.
in the grand scheme of things, but it all adds up. It all adds up. All
Yeah.
right. So next up, we got Ethereum fragmentation fix. New reports highlight a major push within the Ethereum ecosystem to address L2 or layer 2 fragmentation, aiming to unify the user experience across various layer 2 networks to compete with Solana's monolithic speed. So this is something that I am curious to see, especially like with Aerodrome, where it is going on to ETH mainnet. This is part of the new upgrade with the new protocol. Is it's going multi-chain. It's not just going to be base network. It's going to be ETH mainnet and all EVM compatible chains. So actually, you know what? Let me pull that up real quick. So yeah, here we go. So this is a sneak peek at what this what I'm going to be going over later today. but this is some of the alpha that's coming out about the new Aerodrome platform. It looks like you got the Uniswap chain. Some of these I don't recognize. Linea, like that Linea? No, but
You
you
see,
got
but
ETH.
but Mike, you see that
Yeah,
that speaks to your point about fragmentation.
yeah.
The fact that there are all of these disparate chains and liquidity seems to be fragmented on almost like islands, all of these different layer twos. It feels like Ethereum has dozens of isolated islands rather than one cohesive network.
But let me ask you this, because I mean, and I'm asking. It's because I don't fully, I want to be honest. I don't fully understand it, but wouldn't isn't that being fixed, especially with Aerodrome, with their like auto bridging and just the barriers in between the chains, allowing the liquidity to flow freely between the chains. That interoperability to where basically if I onboard liquidity onto Aerodrome and I want to enter a pool and it's on a different layer two or something like that, that it just automatically moves it. And I don't see what's going on. I don't have to swap. I don't have to go to some external bridge and go through the arduous task of bridging it over and hoping that I'm keeping an eye on slippage and all those different things. Is it will be automated and there'll be built-in safeties to where you don't end up losing freaking tens of millions of dollars like that one guy recently.
Yeah, that was a strange incident where people can swap or bridge and lose a significant sum of money. But what Ethereum is working to do, their official UI UX roadmap for 2026, the
Mhm.
goal is to make all of these different layer two rollups feel like a single chain to the end user. So that's the goal here. They're using shared sequencing to order transactions on these different layer twos and enable atomic cross-chain swaps, meaning that both sides of a trade can happen simultaneously or not at all. That would really fix a lot of the bridging problems. Um, and instead of having 10 different transactions to move funds, you would just be able to sign a single intent transaction. So that would you know how if you want to go to Uniswap, let's say, and swap your USDC for ETH, you've got to sign a couple of different transactions. You've got to sign, an approval, you've got to sign a message, and then you've got to sign to actually execute the swap.
Mhm.
So you've got all of these different transactions, and maybe you want to bridge assets from mainnet to base. Okay, well that's a couple of different transactions that you got to sign also. So instead of 10 different transactions to sign, they're moving towards intents, they're called. So you sign a single intent, and that will, serve, instead of a bunch of different transactions that you got to sign. So
Mhm.
this is, it looks like it could be good. This unified Ethereum vision, and they're calling it the Ethereum Economic Zone, the EEZ. So I
Mhm.
guess this was announced at ETHCon. So this EEZ framework has been developed by Gnosis and Zisk. I'm not sure who Zisk is, along with the Ethereum Foundation. And so what they're looking to do here is synchronize composability. So they're saying, hey, we want to allow a smart contract on one layer two to call a contract on another layer two
Yeah.
or on the mainnet within a single transaction. No
Basically
bridges needed.
make it all seamless.
Right, exactly. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah. So I mean that's kind of what I have envisioned, and kind of one of the reasons why I've like kind of honed in on Aerodrome so much is it seems like it's at the the nexus or the node of of all this, where it's all coming together. Where you have the Ethereum and all these EVM layer twos, base being one of them, its relationship with Coinbase, and and not to say that Aerodrome is going to be wildly successful. It may, and it could go to zero, but it's where I see this technology going. It's an example of where I see this technology going, where for the most part, in the past, it's so fragmented. I mean, it's you had to jump through so many hoops to move liquidity in DeFi and different things to get it to the right place so that you can swap for a certain asset or enter a specific pool. I really and this is what Aerodrome is doing is, and I think a lot of other protocols are going to follow suit if they haven't already. They're going to have these UIs, the user experience and user interface, the UX UI, where you simply just need to move liquidity in some form. It doesn't matter the chain, as long as it's compatible, onto the platform. And from there, like I could have USDC on ETH mainnet, and I want to enter a pool that's on the base network or on Solana or on one of these other chains. And all I have to do is say, click, I want to enter the pool, click, this is the liquidity I want to use, click, enter, and it's done. And this is the future of DeFi, not what we've dealt with in the past. We're just early, but these barriers to entry are being removed. And that's where true adoption is going to happen. And these protocols that understand that and are building for that, they see what's going on. And all of you that are listening right now, I can't stress this enough. There is little to no interest in crypto right now because everything's not pumping. It's not sexy. It's not shiny. Those of you that are watching, you're not squirrels that are just, because the people that show up when everything's pumping are the exit liquidity for the people that do the work in the bear. To be honest, because those of us that are learning right now and we're stacking, that when that time comes in these good, strong protocols, it's not going to be like past, bull markets, in my opinion, where rising boat or rising tide lifts all ships. It's going to get to a point to where it's only the serious utility projects that are going to go up, and the rest are going to go away. So you need to educate yourself on to help you pick those, to find those gems, so that maybe out of your 5 or 10 investments, you only hit 1 or 2, but those 1 or 2 are so juicy that others don't matter. That's what you're trying to do right now. So what's your thoughts on that?
There are very few. There are very few protocols in crypto and DeFi that actually make a lot of money. Very few. And there are even fewer that outperform Bitcoin. Even if the protocol does make money, maybe those revenues are not returned to token holders. And that kind of makes the token a little bit of a meme coin. So I think that there's a lot of protocols out there that, although they may not completely die, the tokens might, and those tokens may never come back. So during the next bull cycle, you might not see, your bag of dog shit coins, pump again, because investors are becoming more discerning. They're not just going to throw money at, a random dog coin anymore. They're going to say, hey, if I'm going to swap my hard-earned cash, USDC, USDT, whatever, for a digital asset, it had better pay me some type of yield. There had better be a revenue accrual mechanism for me as the token holder. And that protocol had better be solving a problem that needs solving. Just having cool tech isn't enough. It's got to generate revenue. It's got to return those revenues to token holders. And, I really think that this space is still in its infancy, and we are definitely very early still. And that means that there's a lot of crap out there still. There's a lot of projects out there that just don't do anything. We call them vaporware. And I think that most, like if you look at the top 10 right now, dude, like if we go on over to CoinMarketCap and just take a look at the top 10,
go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah. Let's take a look at this. Let's talk through some of these shitters.
Yeah.
It'll be great. So here we go. All right. So let's see what we got here. So Bitcoin number one, largest market cap here, 1.3 trillion with a T, trillion dollars. Okay. Now Bitcoin is the king for a reason. It is the most decentralized, truly decentralized. And, the only problem for Bitcoin is the mining business model. You really do there needs to be transaction volume on the mainnet to support miners after the next one or two halving cycles. So hopefully there will be enough, layer twos built on top of Bitcoin or something along those
Or
lines.
DeFi.
Yeah, true DeFi built on top of Bitcoin to generate the transaction volumes to keep the miners to incentivize the
Profit.
miners to keep their machines on. Yeah. And to refresh their machines and to grow the network and to keep it decentralized. So Bitcoin's at the top, Ethereum, number two, and then you got Tether, BNB. So these top four, Tether is probably the most successful bank in history per employee. They
Oh yeah.
generate like a
No,
ridiculous.
it's not maybe, it is.
Yeah, it is, right? I mean, how many employees do they have? Five or something? You know?
No, I think they recently did some hiring. They have like 20 or 30 or something like that. But yeah, they're like a multi billion dollar company, and they have like a handful of employees. So for every employee, they're making like billions and billions of dollars.
Extreme efficiency enabled via blockchain technology. So, USDT Tether, the company Tether, the most successful bank in history per employee.
And
And that,
we reported last week that they are finally, and they actually named the top four auditing company and a second prep auditing company to supposedly they're going to do an actual real audit of their reserves, of what's backing Tether. So if they are successful with that, that's very bullish for Tether. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, Mike, I'm just kind of surprised that that hasn't been done already. Like, why haven't they done that already? It's a good thing that they're doing it now, to be able to become compliant with new US law. But it's just kind of funny that they haven't already done that. So,
Agreed.
going down the top three, you got Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tether, and then you got BNB. So BNB is a good example of the flywheel in motion. So that Aster, fake decentralized exchange that Binance launched because it's not decentralized. It's
No,
basically
hold on. Let's explain. Let's explain why. And the one thing that I know about it is there is a very small group of wallets that hold like 95% of the tokens.
yes, that's true. But there's also something about it actually being a decentralized exchange or not. Um, so, here's the thing, it's kind of like a quasi DEX. Um, and it's got, some of the best features of centralized exchanges like high speed, small spreads, deep liquidity. And the thing that's good for BNB about Aster is there is this little bit of a flywheel where when you trade on the Aster DEX, those fees do end up being used to buy more BNB.
Mm.
So that's actually a net positive for BNB. But
But not
again,
for Aster.
well, not for Aster, not so much for Aster.
They're basically funneling off liquidity from Aster to BNB.
Yeah, basically, it seems as though Binance moved all of its trading volume onto the Aster DEX. And so that's why you see these massive numbers on the Aster DEX in terms of trading volume.
So
But
they're fluffing the numbers. They're cooking the
yeah, that's kind of what it seems, and that type of stuff is not going to fly in the future when there's clear
right.
regulation in
Yeah.
the United States. Like, you're not going to be able to do schemes like that.
No.
So whenever I see a flywheel, it makes me think, ooh, what happens if this reverses? Or
Yeah.
what's the regulatory risk for this flywheel scheme?
Yeah.
So, and then just take a look at the market cap, 83, almost $84 billion for BNB. And then we've got good old XRP, $82 billion market cap,
For
you
what?
know, for what? I don't know for what. But this is just yeah.
It's not a stake in Ripple. I can't stress this enough. There it's not a security. It's not a stock in Ripple. And there's nothing in the tokenomics or any part of the relationship between the XRPL, Ripple, and XRP that they share. Like if they become a super successful global bank, there is nothing to move, those profits to token holders. The only thing that will be driving that price up is if people are willing to buy it for more than you bought it for. And if over the next tens of thousands of years, each transaction burns 0.00001 XRP, however long it's going to take for that to even impact the supply of the billions and billions and billions, to where it hopefully makes the price go up. So I anybody that asks me that's getting into crypto, I always tell them to avoid XRP.
So you know who XRP is actually competing with, I think now? Canton. This little $5.8 billion market cap protocol, this is the market cap for the Canton token.
Yeah.
This is, XRP's real competition, because all of those use cases
Yep.
that Ripple Labs was selling XRP, shilling XRP for none of them.
Cross-border remittances,
Yeah.
and all that stuff, and the freaking Nostro Vostro, eliminating Nostro Vostro accounts, and all of that stuff. Canton is actually doing, and it's not rumors of that they're partnering with, or they were in an interview sitting on a stage with somebody.
Right.
And we've done a couple of interviews with one of the co-founders, and Shaw, great guy, and they actually have the partnerships. They are like these organizations have signed on, and are actively building or actively live on the network. But sorry, go ahead.
So check this out, Mike. As you were speaking, I was just looking at these top 12 and just thinking to myself, okay, within the top 12, you've got Bitcoin, the king, decentralized money. You've got Ethereum, the smart contract layer that you can build on top of. You can also build on top of Bitcoin, by the way. So you got the king, and you got, yeah, man, building some cool stuff. So you got the king, Bitcoin, you got Ethereum, you got the most successful bank in the world, and then you got a Chinese scam with BNB, and then you got some type of fraud with XRP, and then you got a fucking meme coin in Doge that does nothing. And then what is Bitcoin Cash again? Can someone tell me why this has a $9.3 billion market cap? And then ADA?
My understanding is just like isn't it like a fork of Bitcoin?
Like, why?
Exactly.
Why?
What's the point?
Like 9 billion for what? And then you've got ADA, Cardano, 9 billion again. I have no idea what this chain is ever going to do or supposed to do. And then you've got, I don't even know what this is, dude. Like Eunice said, LEO. Is this a law enforcement operation? What exactly is LEO? Eunice said LEO.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, right. I don't even know what that is. It's probably a good idea that we figure out what this is, because it's in the top 20. Let's check this out. Here's
an
the
interesting chart.
Oh, is this Bitfinex's token? Is that what this is?
Looks like it.
Yeah. So I guess that's what Eunice, LEO token is. I guess this is Bitfinex's token. That's kind of what it looks like. Let me just scroll down here a little bit and just see if we can get a little bit of information about this token. This is iFinex. Don't even know what this is, man. Let's take a look. Let's learn more about LEO. Tell me about
really quick while you're looking that up. I do have some Cardano news. Cardano's midnight deal, Input Output Global IOG founder Charles Hoskinson confirmed a 250 million pound tokenization deal for the privacy-focused Midnight blockchain, aiming to bridge the gap between regulated finance and public ledgers. So, I mean, a little bit of bullish, news for Cardano. But again, my question goes back to, how does, if Cardano ends up being the future Ethereum, or takes over DeFi, what part of it is going to share those profits with you, the token holder? Other than staking, which is I think 3% or 4%, maybe 6% that you earn.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at that flagship deal right now, Mike, and what I see is, Midnight Foundation and Monument Bank that they've partnered to tokenize 250 million pounds in retail deposits.
Mhm.
So that's kind of interesting. It says that Midnight is not a replacement for Cardano, but a
Mhm.
specialized layer designed for rational privacy. Um, I think what we've got to do to really
Again, isn't
understand,
that what Canton already cracked that code without having to do spinoffs?
I think so. I think so. And, I think it's really important that we go back and read about the browser wars in the 1990s and the operating system wars in the
Yeah.
1980s and early 90s, so that we can understand, what the direction for these digital assets could be over the next, 10 years or so. Because
Well,
it's,
people talk about history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. I mean, the dot coms, the browser wars, the operating systems, all of that, technology. We've gone through this before multiple times where you have this ocean of competitors that just slowly through attrition gets whittled down to where it's the strongest survive.
Yeah, and so the history of these wars, right? So the operating system wars, that was the battle for bedrock in the 80s and 90s. The war was about the ground that you stood on. So it was Windows versus Mac OS
Mm,
versus IBM's OS 2. And the goal was total control over hardware. If you owned the operating system, you owned every piece of software written for it. And Microsoft won by being open enough for developers, but
mm,
also by being closed enough to maintain a monopoly. And so,
mhm,
what that taught us was that these network effects, where a system becomes more valuable as more people use it, that is the ultimate moat. So, and then we had the browser wars. Yeah, we had the browser wars, right? That was the battle for the gateway. And so
mhm.
once the operating system wars were settled, then the fight moved on to how we access the new world, which was the
Mm,
internet at that time.
yeah.
So, Microsoft, this was World War number 1 for, the browser wars. It was Netscape versus Internet Explorer. And Microsoft used its operating system dominance to kill
Mhm.
Netscape by bundling Internet Explorer for free. So
Yeah.
that was a war of distribution. And then we had World War II in the browser wars, which was Internet Explorer versus Firefox versus Chrome. This was a war of performance and standards. And Chrome won because it's faster and cheaper, and well, not necessarily cheaper, but definitely faster, and turned the browser into a platform that could run apps like Google Docs, for example. So it made the underlying operating system irrelevant. And so, how do you relate that to the crypto wars that we see now? Basically wars for liquidity, wars for users, trying to avoid fragmentation. These layer ones are essentially like the new operating systems. So blockchains like Ethereum and Solana are the operating systems of the decentralized age right now. You can also build on top of Bitcoin, but not many people have built much yet. So the parallel here is that just as developers chose Windows because that's where the users are, developers today choose a blockchain based on liquidity, security, and developer tools. So the conflict that we have now is that we're in this fragmentation era. So just like you couldn't run a Mac app on Windows in 1992,
Mhm.
you can't really run an Ethereum dApp on Solana without a bridge. I know
Yeah.
that there was a protocol that was trying to bridge, EVM dApps to the Solana virtual machine. I don't think that ever really worked. So, Mike, you remember in the early 90s, I remember this when I was a little kid. You had to make sure when you went to Kinko's that you gave them the right
I was in
thing.
the army in the early 90s.
Yeah, man. I mean, I just remember using some of these platforms, Mac OS and Windows back in the day, right? And if you had a Windows application that you needed to run, you couldn't run that on Mac OS. If
No.
you had, a Mac, remember floppy disks? If you had a Mac floppy disk with an application on it, you couldn't run that on your Windows machine. The Windows machine couldn't even read it. So siloed operating systems, and now we've got fragmented liquidity. So yeah.
No, and that's what I'm getting at is, eventually, there's going to be, an attrition of these projects that David always talks about, that there are vaporware. The weakest are going to be culled first. If it's vaporware where it's nothing but hollow promises, they're saying that, we're building something to address this pain point or this issue. Rumors of, partnerships, all that kind of stuff. Those are going to go away. They're going to go to zero. They're going to go away. It's already starting to happen. You see, especially in the bear market, you see weak projects, go under. And then you're going to see projects that maybe they genuinely are building something and they have really strong tech, but they just don't have the adoption, and they're going to go away. And the token is going to, go to zero. Everybody's going to sell off because it's an emotional thing. If they fold, people aren't going to hold, the token. And then, eventually you're going to have the ones that everything's being built on. And that's why you need to educate yourself right now. That's why we're here, is to give you the nitty gritty, the down and dirty, like it or not, about all the projects, even the ones that I'm bullish on. We talk about Aerodrome all the time. David isn't bullish on it. I am. But, we pull back the curtain on all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly. And that's what you need to do with these investments, because if you are going to be picking these, let's bring Taylor up. If you're going to be, delving in to these projects and investing in these projects, there we go. You need to make sure that you're picking ones that have the best chance for you to profit. That are building something that these institutions and I know this goes against the grain on, the cyberpunk, Bitcoin, decentralized, movement, and that's okay. It's there are decentralized plays that I think are going to be successful. However, if you want to profit, you need to understand the amount of liquidity that these institutions and governments are going to be dumping into these markets, and they're going to be dumping it into things like Camp. They're going to be dumping it into things like Ethereum. They're going to be dumping it into things like Bitcoin. And you need to have, some of these as your base of your portfolio, your crypto portfolio. And yeah, you can, roll the dice on some, long shots, absolutely. But I suggest that you just use a small portion of your portfolio for that, for moon bags, and maybe try to build those bags using DeFi liquidity pools or staking or, something like that, just in case one of them hits, and you can peel some profits off of that to reinvest. So anyway.
Yeah, I think you got to avoid the low quality stuff, though.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. That's better. So Taylor, what's up, man?
Nothing much. What are you guys talking about today?
Oh, so we're just going through some news, but it's about that time. For the last hour, I wouldn't mind delving into our topic. So, are you ready to transition over, David?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. All right, so let's dive into the topic. So, the title for the show was $288 million war chest has been triggered. Basically, midterms are coming up this November. Those that aren't familiar with the term, in between the presidential elections, every 4 years, every two, the middle, in the middle, you have where the, Congress, the House and the Senate have their elections. So our representatives are supposed to represent us. That doesn't seem like they're doing a great job, but I digress. They have to, start pandering to us to try to get our votes. And that's coming up. And so they have amassed massive war chests, and the war chest being their funding for their campaigns to try to, and the Democrats are going to be pushing hard because they are wanting to flip seats because they are the minority right now. So they're trying to flip seats so that they can get more votes on the floor so that they can push their agenda. And if you don't remember, if you weren't in the markets, in the crypto markets, last bear market, when the Democrats were in power, it was an all-out war on crypto. You had Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren being the mouthpiece for banks, using Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC at the time, for choke point 2.0, basically trying to stop crypto innovation because banks are threatened by it. You can see it with the legislation that's going on right now with the Clarity Act. They are trying to stop it because it disrupts their whole model. They are scared that the flight of liquidity out of bank accounts into DeFi and places that we can earn on our yield, and they will basically go under because their whole model is based off they have a monopoly where it's where we have to keep our money and they make all the yield and we just have to be like thank you, for charging us fees and not giving us anything for our money. And like David talks about, they in DeFi University, they charge you fees for maintenance, they charge you fees for ATMs, they charge you out of network fees, they fees. So with that being said, gentlemen, what do you see coming up, leading up to the election? And do you see a flippening happening where you think Democrats, keeping in mind that supposedly there's record turnout for No King's Day and all that stuff, what do you see happening?
So right now there's an 84% chance that the House will flip. There's only about to both the House and the Senate. It's a lot harder, of course. It's a 49% chance right now, which is actually pretty high for how many seats there are, but of like flipping both the House and the Senate. And so, and that is significantly switched over the last 2 months. The two kind of, elections, especially off, when it's not the presidential election year, it is really about bases because a lot of people aren't going to show up in November that aren't political because they're usually people only get involved that are less political in the presidential election cycles. And so when you have these off cycle ones, interesting things start happening. And that is who can get their base to show up. I think the Republicans are probably in a lot worse situation than these polls are showing, mainly because, pretty much everything MAGA people came out to vote for, Trump has kind of turned his back against. I mean, it's every time I turn on and watch any, kind of a Republican sided viewed podcast, they are not happy. I mean, it's not even like just a little bit. It is. I mean, I've even heard some hardcore MAGA people saying things like, I will vote Democrat. And that is not a good sign when you're like diehards are out there not happy. And the biggest things are, I mean, what were the things that people wouldn't vote for?
No new wars.
No new wars was the number one thing. I vote both sides of the aisle. I did not vote for Trump the first two times. I voted for him on this last one, mainly on the issue of the Ukraine war. And I thought, if I can get first term Trump, he kept us out of wars. The first thing that Biden got in, and I voted for Biden, and he got in. The first thing he did was start the Ukraine war happen. And people say, he did start. I'm sorry, but the president of the United States ultimately decides that there's going to be a war anywhere.
Yeah. He's the commander in chief.
He's the commander in chief of the world because no one's going to do anything unless they kind of get approval from it. But it was just horrific what was going on in the Ukraine war. It was like people act like watching those videos of those poor on both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, they're just being hunted by these drones.
And for what
Exactly. For nothing. It was just so infuriating to watch. And and so I was really pushed. I was like, okay, well, Trump's first term, he did an amazing job of not getting into a new war, trying to, undo the wars that were going on at the time. And, you know, I don't know. I personally believe he is an anti-war guy because he's basically since 2000 been saying that. But somebody has him by the balls right now. And I think he thought, personally, I think he thought, oh, it'll be like Venezuela. We can just get in and out and we'll be done. And whoever told him that that was going to happen with Iran was should be fired immediately.
Well, there's I'll summarize, but there's a story where a general, they did military always does war games, and there was a general, and he was tasked with basically being Iran and having to go to war with the U.S. and basically laid out. This is years ago, and he basically laid out everything that's happening right now, where Iran shifts from conventional warfare basically to guerrilla warfare tactics using drones and things like that. Because of and basically they got pissed at him because he won, and so they removed him from the war game and put somebody in there that basically just fought traditionally, and of course the U.S. won. So
that's interesting because there was I was watching a guy. Basically, he's an insider. He says that they were shocked at the strategies that they're using.
Yeah,
it was like, I think Mike, you hit it right on the head. It was like they're shocked because the guy that showed them what they would do, they didn't want to listen.
Yeah,
and that's
no, and it happens over and over. Like when I first got in the military, everything was geared towards Russia, and the Cold War. All of our tactics, all of our equipment, our camouflage, everything was for that climate, that terrain, that that enemy, that adversary. And there was, after 9/11, there was a huge shift. I mean, like the first time that we were over there, we were using black vests from Vietnam era. We were using Kevlars from the Cold War and stuff like that. All of our equipment, all of our vehicles were painted that black, dark forest green and all that. We're in the middle of the desert.
Yeah,
it's just you know what I mean.
Yeah,
but then slowly, like over years and years and years, they started coming up with different, because we were fighting a different enemy. We were fighting basically guerrilla warfare tactics, so we had to adjust our fighting style. We had to adjust how we trained people to fight. We had to change the equipment. All of those things, and so it's a totally different way of fighting. And unfortunately, I do not see this ending anytime soon. And that's going to wear, like you said, on the Republican Party the most, because they're the ones that are in power right now. And, Trump is the one that ultimately has to answer for that. And if it flips the Congress, then that's not good for crypto, and that's not good for the economy.
Yeah. So right now, the big, the Senate is really where you have to look, because are they going to flip the Senate? Because if they just take the House, really nothing's going to happen. So the four big toss-ups.
Maybe explain that real quick. Just why that the House and Senate matter.
Well, I mean, in order to really push any legislation through, you have to have both houses. You can't just have one of them and then expect to be able to put anything. But really, for Trump, he's going to be facing a lot if he loses the Senate and the House. They're definitely going to impeach him.
Well, he'll be a lame duck as well.
Now we'll actually pass through and everything, but I don't know. But like at the end of the day, there's some very sketchy things he's done in enriching himself. You got the whole Epstein file issue of they might have serious crimes that he's committed actually in the files that aren't being released. So they have plenty of things, but like Susan Collins right now is probably going to lose her seat. She's an incumbent up in Maine, and that was a hard one for the Republicans to get. It's probably going to flip over. North Carolina is it's going to be a harder one for the Democrats to get this one. But if MAGA people don't show up because they're mad, that's another one they could flip. Georgia, they currently have it. If it goes Republican, it could go to Republican, so they could win one there. But Michigan is the other one that's kind of, it's really contested. Texas, we have we have interesting developments happening in the sense that there's a battle between our attorney general and the current incumbent. His name's John Cornyn, and Kim Baxton is actually from the city I'm from, McKinney, and he has a lot of ethical issues that have been brought up against him, legal battles. He engaged in a lot of, he was actually, he had criminal cases get brought against him for basically fraud and different things like that. They kind of went under the rug and
are now being dredged up.
Yeah, I mean, he's our attorney general, so it's kind of like magically they don't kind of move forward. But he has those issues. So if he wins, it's going to be a very interesting issue that goes through. But Democrats saw a huge surge throughout the whole nation in these primary elections that came through. Texas, they had the most show up since I think 1970s. Right?
Damn.
Like percentage wise,
how much of that do you think is actually real? Do you think that there's like widespread voter fraud?
Oh, absolutely. Epstein talked about it in the files. Like there's basically saying that, yes, absolutely. I mean, like one of the famous stories like that I always is like JFK. There was a county in Texas. In order for him to win, he had to win Texas. And there's the county building that had all the votes in it burned down.
Of course.
I know. And so it's like voter fraud always happens every single election. And I think it was Bannon and it was Epstein. It was an email communication, basically how like they were talking about
lining out how it's done.
Yeah, basically like this group of there's like you can go look. It's all over on the internet, but basically how this group influences those voter booths in the sense of like manipulating them and changing votes and different things like that. But of course, I mean, this is power. I mean, there's fraud everywhere. I mean, even when Biden won, it was like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. The mail-in votes all of a sudden increased significantly.
Right. Right. It was a lot too. Wasn't it like an additional 20 million votes over the average?
Yeah. It's just like,
well, more people voted for Biden supposedly than they voted for Obama. And Obama, love him or hate him, the dude was articulate as shit. He was loved by, that entire party. I mean, I do not see how Biden is was a more popular candidate than Obama.
Yeah. But like Trump's first term, I mean, when he beat Hillary, it looked, that was very fishy.
So Taylor, Joseph is asking, do you think Abbott will keep his governor's seat?
I mean, it's hard to beat incumbents like that, and especially in Texas with the Republican. I mean, Texas, the problem that we have right now is like we've gotten Abbott's probably more a sane person than the other people on the Republican side that are around him. I mean, like right now they were trying to get rid of all like the Delta 9 stuff and everything. And it passed through the Texas House and Senate, and Abbott, didn't sign it into law. So, cause he kind of saw how unpopular that was, but man, it was pushed hard. But Abbott, I think he'll be safe unless this continues. I mean, if there's another thing that they do that's crazy in the next couple months, I just don't see Republicans like winning at all. It's just like one crazy move after another. And it's been that way for like the last year. I mean, we had the whole tariffs thing. I mean, the whole thing that a lot of us voted for was we really did like the Doge, like, go in there and clean up Washington.
Yeah.
And then it was like, we're going to do this. Oh, now we're not.
Yeah, it's like, all of a sudden Doge has stood down, and Elon is gone, and all the fraud that they found, like, no action was taken. It was just like, okay, so you're gonna show us that there is a bunch of fraud, then do nothing about it, and then now you got that kid up in Minnesota, exposing all the fraud. He's out in California exposing all the fraud, and nothing's being done about it. And the problem is it's mostly Democrat run states. And the sad thing is like, you have all these no kings people, marching, and, not to be partisan, but, you can't march for something titled that and then vote for a party that was okay with people losing their jobs because they didn't get a vaccination, or, that want to tax people more than they're already being taxed. People that are okay with, censoring, or taking away people's freedom of speech, or, their Second Amendment rights. It's like, you can't say no king, and want a bigger government, and want a government that's running your healthcare and running everything. That's, that is more king-like than, Trump. So, and not to say that, Trump is the answer, but, we need to stop looking, past the D and the R, and start really digging down and paying attention and voting for politicians that actually want to fix things. Like Rand Paul, and Ron Paul. I mean, those guys have been screaming from the rooftops fraud for decades, and no ways, everybody's laughed at them. And now it's all true. I would love to see one of them run for president, and more people like them get into politics.
Because, Mike, the fraud is so blatant. It's right out there in the open, man. All you got to do is look.
Yeah.
But the problem for me is that I actually disagree, Taylor. I don't think that, I don't think that the MAGA movement is angry at Trump. I don't necessarily see that. What I do think, though, is that there's no alternative. You can't vote for a Democrat. You just can't, because that means ushering back in, DEI and woke nonsense and transgender surgeries and all of the worst things that they push. So there literally is no alternative. Like, Democrats get back into power in this country, man, and we're going to turn into the UK, or we're going to turn into Western Europe, and the floodgates of illegal immigration, that's going to be opened back up again. And we're going to have another 20 million people from God knows where flood into the country again. And it's just like, there is no choice but to vote Republican. There is no choice, in my opinion. I think that, the socialism is just communism light. And you see how well that's worked out, over the last 120 years around the world. Well, never has it ever worked.
In New York, right, with their, openly, communist or socialist, mayor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, did you see them waving communist flags?
Yeah.
And these No Kings rallies, man, these are not organic. These are paid for.
Oh, no, I did a little bit of research on that this morning, where it was showing who was funding it. And it was freaking not Warren, but it was the usual suspects. Soros and Warren Buffett was actually funding it. There's a bunch of really big, big money people that are backing all of this. And yeah, I mean, they're waving flags. You have, they're waving ISIS flags at some of these, and Hezbollah flags next to LGBTQ flags. I mean, make it make sense.
Yeah, well, you do have the big movement. I I mean, that's the anti-blue and white country support. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't want to say the name. All right,
yeah.
go into your guys' YouTube. Something, but that's going to be a big, I mean, a big push. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just not seeing it as much. But it seems like the Democrat Party has kind of walked away from the woke movement.
No, that's what they are. That's what they are. They are the woke. They are the communists. They are aligned with Islam. That's what they are. Because all you got to do is look and see in Western Europe what has happened. That was what we were moving towards here during Biden, was the Western Europe, implosion, like this self-immolation going on there.
Yeah.
Like that's where we were headed. And I think that that's what the Democrats offer, is more of that.
Well, yeah, because I mean, yeah, both parties doing something on one side and the other that all seem to benefit a certain group of people.
Well, let's move this back, towards kind of the financial aspect of these elections. It's we got the red pill for diving deep on this stuff, but I want to really get down to what both of you see, up to the elections, what you see happening in macro markets, crypto market, legislation, things like that. Trying to get things done before a potential flip, in Congress, and then if they do or don't flip, what do you see happening after the election? So, David, let's start with you. Like, kind of what do you see leading up to the election getting potentially accomplished or not accomplished?
Well, it doesn't seem like anything's getting accomplished now. It seems like everything is already stalled. And, I don't know who to be angry at. Mostly, I'm angry at Republican senators for, it seems like, just failing to do their jobs. And when I take a look at, the Senate races, it looks like there are a record 11 senators, 4 Democrats and 7 Republicans, that have announced that they're not going to seek re-election. So that means there's a lot of vulnerable seats. Now, whether or not the Senate will get flipped, I don't think so. But it looks like the House could definitely get flipped. And that would mean, as Taylor was saying, that, hey, Trump is going to get impeached again. Like, of course. But also no legislation will get passed, because the one thing that the Democrat Party does really well is stick together. And they will not vote for any Republican legislation at all. So what does that mean for us as investors in digital assets? It means we don't get regulatory clarity. That's what that means. And so that means, innovation will be pushed away from the United States into jurisdictions that don't have, that type of, obscure regulation, or we need clarity here. Banks and institutions need to know what's legal. You need to know what are the rules of the road. We don't have that yet. And if we don't get that this year, we probably don't get it, period. So what does that mean for, where are the innovators going to go? Where are the builders going to go? If they can't build legally in the United States, they're going to go to South America. They're going to go to Southeast Asia. That's what I'm thinking about. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking about doing. But when I think about for the rest of the year, I think about crude oil. That's what I think about. Crude at 103, WTI at 103.5. If that continues to go higher, it doesn't matter how much I like Trump and what he's doing. People are going to vote against that. They're going to vote against, having to pay double at the pump, regardless of the fact that I think that what is happening in Iran is overdue and a great thing to remove this evil regime from the world stage. I think that's a great thing. I don't support boots on the ground there. Seems as though that may be the direction that the administration is heading towards. But if crude oil remains above $100 for the next 6 months and even goes higher, that is going to cause a financial shock. That's going to do that.
It already has. I actually got a bunch of stuff pulled up on that. So I'll rattle through these real quick. Egypt shut down its shops at 9 p.m., mandated work from home Sundays. The government internally called it a war economy mode. 4 days after the IMF praised them and unlocked 2.3 billion. Turkey Central Bank burned through 30 billion in March defending the lira. Pakistan's prime minister went on national TV on Eid, a Muslim holiday, and announced government salary cuts and a 50% fuel allocation reduction. They approved a 358 million austerity fund. Russia banned cash exports above $100,000 in gold bars above 100 grams. Iraq banned 22 banks from USD transactions. Cashless mandate for all government institutions coming July. South Korea launched a literal wartime economic response body on March 25th. The prime minister chairs it. India secretly created a 6.7 billion economic stabilization fund. It wasn't in the news, it was buried in a budget supplement. Lebanon's currency collapsed 98%. The war added 14 billion in damage on top of that. Every single government on this list told their citizens the economy is doing fine within the last 30 days. All of this happened last week. So, I mean, when you have 30% of oil production being choked off because the Strait of Hormuz and the war in Iraq, you got the Philippines. But the price of gas has doubled. There's some countries like Cuba and other places where there isn't fuel. There is no diesel. This is impacting the world. And then you see people in the US, fuel prices are skyrocketing. And that's going to impact people at all levels because that's what's used and has to flow into the price of things. Anything that's trucked, anything that's moved by rail, anything that's moved by boat, all of that has to be factored in, the price of moving those goods and services. So, yeah, what David's saying is people are going to vote their wallet. People are going to vote regardless of party. People are struggling. They're struggling to buy groceries. They're struggling to pay rent. You can look at Google Analytics and what people are Googling. Help in, how can I get help with paying my mortgage? Things like that. That is what drives people to go to the polls. And if they don't like what the current party is doing, they are going to go with the other side.
Yep, I mean that's how it's always basically decided is in these years you want things to be going well, and that is the reality of the situation. Is like shutting off oil supply to the world is going to significantly. I mean, in America, we're not going to feel it as much as the rest of the world, but like these, especially any nation that does not have access to oil, is really going to struggle.
Southeast Asia, especially, because I know they get the majority of their oil from through that Strait of Hormuz, just because of its geographical location. And it's not just Iran's oil. I mean, it's all of those countries, around the Strait of Hormuz. So Taylor, what are your thoughts? Kind of leading up to the elections. What do you think is going to happen or not happen leading up to the election? With our current administration.
I think this Iran situation is going to get worse. Ultimately, I do think they're going to be forced to put boots on the ground, which it's going to be a disaster. Just because I'm going this based upon the problem with generally nations at our point in history. We have this idea that we're invincible, mainly because we can go around and fly our planes around and drop bombs on people. And if we have this it's this hubris where we're just like, well, we don't lose wars. And generally this is how empires behave. And right now it's basically, if you're Iran, you can't agree because you just got stabbed in the back twice with peace negotiations. I mean, Trump made a deal with them. in June and then came back against it while they were in the middle of peace negotiations, and they thought they were about to sign and then got bombed. So if you're Iran, it's completely stupid for you to trust anything the United States is going to say, because all you're going to do is let them go back to the table and try to figure out another way to beat you. So it has to be you completely get out of the region agreement, which America is not going to agree to, because we have all these, alliances that we've made in the Middle East, and our petrodollar depends on it. And so the next step is going to be, oh, well, they're not going to listen to us, so we got to go after them. And eventually the generals are going to have to tell Trump, well, there's no other way. You got to, actually put soldiers on the ground to control certain areas. And so I think that's going to be
this out. But again, a guy down in Australia, or a person down in Australia, diesel here in Australia not far off $12 a gallon, and over 500 service stations running dry.
I mean, that's going to be the problem is if you're Trump, I mean, the world depends on the United States military keeping everything flowing.
Yep.
And so you have this problem, which is, the real problem is Israel. I mean, I'm going to just be flat out. I mean, the fact that they want the greater Israel, and that requires them taking a lot of land. That is,
Israel actually said that if there is boots on ground, that they will not support.
Yeah, we don't have, people don't understand. Israel's not our ally. We don't have a peace agreement with them. Like, they don't have any obligation to come to defense or anything of anything that we do. And so it's going to be asked of us to do it. But ultimately, the reality of the situation is if you know anything about the religious context of that area, Israel believes its borders go from the Nile to the Euphrates. And you want to understand why we have these immigration problems and why that area is all the people are fleeing it. It's because Israel has been pushing it into European countries. That's why Muslims have been going to Europe for the last decade, and why they're fleeing that area is they're trying to depopulate the area so they can eventually take that area and that land. And why are we attacking Iran right now? Israel wants it. And the problem is both parties do whatever that country tells them to do.
I don't agree, Taylor. I think that Israel is the only democracy in that region, surrounded by theocratic regimes, the worst of them being Iran. And it posed a threat to the world for decades. And I don't think that Israel is pushing Muslims into Western Europe to depopulate an area from the Nile to the Euphrates in order to take that land. I think that Jews living in Israel are persecuted by Muslims who want to kill them. It's an existential threat. And unfortunately, it's not just a threat to Israelis in Israel. It's also a threat to the entire world. And so when you were talking about, Trump backstabbing the Iranians, we're talking about a terrorist organization here. This is not a legitimate regime in Iran. These people are terrorists, man. They want to kill us.
Well, again, let's move back to the financial aspects. I really want to make sure that we're sticking to the kind of the topic of.
Well, we're getting to the fun stuff, man.
Well, yeah, that's what the red pill's for, is to dive into those aspects, and that's kind of why I created it, was to kind of separate that out, because then we can get as spicy as we want. I really want to focus on the financial aspects. So, what do you gentlemen think is going to happen if the Democrats flip the Congress, and for the basically the last 2 years of Trump's second term?
It's going to be a shit show. That's what's going to happen.
Well, let's detail that. So, what do you feel is going to happen with crypto legislation?
Nothing will get passed. There will be no progress. It'll be.
I think it's going to be the exact same no matter who's in there right now. I think the problem that you have is, right now, Republicans control everything, but they're not doing anything. And that was the same thing flipped the other way when Biden first got in. Biden got in, they didn't do anything. They controlled the House, Senate, and the presidency. They did nothing to help the American people and nothing to really move things forward. And it really feels like either party, when they get in, they play the game to the electorate to tell them everything they want to hear.
Yeah.
But when they actually get in, they don't really do anything. And there's no functionality happening. So I don't think you're going to see any movement, and you're going to exactly right in the sense of what's going to happen. Eventually, the people are going to go, well, I can do this business somewhere else.
Right. Right.
And so if you continue to have this problem of a government that is not effective at all and actually, moving things forward and focusing on what needs to be focused on and actually helping the people, that's the problem right now in America. It seems like both of those parties are captured by, okay, well, what do my donors want me to do?
Yeah. And special interests, basically.
Yeah. And they'll push those things through. And then when it comes to actually, hey, we need to actually deal with the issues that are going on here in the country, we got other things to worry about right now. And so we have these problems of we're ineffective. But I mean, that's ultimately, that's the sign of a dying empire, which is that nothing actually gets that. Money is consumed and taken over everything that needs to be done, and then not focusing on actually what moves us forward, makes us more competitive in the world. Those things get thrown to the backside.
Yeah.
And being ignored.
We contract, not grow.
Yeah. And economically, this is really bad. Like, really, in America, the only thing that's driving our economy is, tech. That's really it. I mean, that's like all the money, all the investment. And a lot of people don't understand. A lot of this tech is invested in countries like Saudi Arabia and those rich, countries that basically are pouring money into ideas like Uber and are, can take losses for 10 years, but keep pouring money into them. And I think and AI is the big one now, of course. And the problem is those countries don't have money to invest. Where are you going to get those billions of dollars to build your tech ideas? And so we have this reality that might hit the U.S. economy in a very hard way, that there's not money there to invest in these tech ideas. And we're not a nation built on, hey, we got a bunch of manufacturing and different things going on here. So
right.
That will keep us going. And so it's going to be an interesting road here for the next couple of years. But I'm not seeing anybody that's running on in any kind of area that I'd go, oh my gosh, these people, they have a vision of the future.
Yeah. Right. We don't see that from anyone. It's almost like status quo is the vision for the future. And that's not what I want.
No.
But Taylor, do you remember, last year when we were talking about all the AI CapEx, right? That capital expenditure, these, Mag 7, the hyperscalers, we're talking about like $5 trillion in CapEx required to really build things out. And I read some report from Goldman that they were saying that private credit was going to supply like 1.5 trillion of that. And I know, I'm talking about, this is what people were saying last year.
Yeah.
And, now that it's pretty clear that AI is basically eating software, and these software companies are just getting shellacked, and private credit is gating investors because they can't service these redemptions. Where does the money come from to build out all these data centers and all the power? And where's the ROI on that CapEx? When are investors going to see an ROI on all that spend? Maybe never. So, it seems like you're right, Taylor, that there is something happening at the end of an empire, and these things are happening all at once. We've got the Iran situation with, crude oil up above $100. We've got private credit imploding. We've got the S&P rolling over from an all-time high. Looks like it should move sharply lower. None of these things are good economically. And as far as when people go to the polls, man, they're going to vote against the incumbency because of this. and then we're going to get nothing done. It's going to be the uni-party situation. So,
and the other issue that the reality is the only thing that America has going for it is there's no other place right now that's really stepping up to be the free market option. Like, that's the weird issue right now. It's like, well, China would be the logical infrastructure because they have all the power and they built out the infrastructure, but the Communist Party there isn't going to allow AI to develop in such a way that it's going to be free to actually grow. It's going to be controlled by, the party. And so it can't really move there. You can't, there's no other good option to move anything to. And so America still looks like your option of building out AI for the future, but we won't invest in the infrastructure that needs to be built out in order to make it happen. And I think you're going to have this subsequent problem, which is going to start rolling out here, like Claude, with the advances that they're making, is now really going to start hitting white collar jobs. And so when the polls come around in November, that might be one of the biggest issues is whatever candidate's coming out saying, I'll stop AI from taking your job, people are going to vote for that.
It took my job. It took my job. It's true, man. It's totally true. Did you guys see the news about the Claude Anthropic model called Mythos or Mythos? Did you see that today? Yeah. So, I mean, look, Opus 4.6 is so much smarter than every other model. And now they're talking about Mythos. I can only imagine, how, great that model is going to be. But it basically replaces all knowledge workers. If you pair these models with an OpenClaw framework, you can literally replace just about every knowledge worker, which is and it happens so fast. What is that going to do? When you start seeing companies just cut their workforces by 50 or 80%.
Or the companies just going under, that's the big issue is you don't need a lot of these things anymore that, huge, or I use Zapier a lot for different things, but now with Claude, I can integrate something almost instantaneously without having to go to Zapier. And so I'm like, well, that company's basically obsolete because everybody can just go and build their own, interface to connect with anything. Attorneys, it's going to be for us, it's all the form builder software that we use. It's just not needed anymore. Those are billion-dollar companies that are just going to be wiped out here. I mean, I used to never, ever, ever hear from one of my form builders. I get an email every day. How can we help you? And I'm just like, leave me alone.
They're in trouble. They're in trouble.
I know. And you could tell. You could tell when companies are in trouble. It's because you start hearing from them all the time. And
all of a sudden, customer service gets really good.
Exactly. All of a sudden, oh, good.
That's so funny. Yeah.
And it's interesting to see it now, how quickly it's happening. Because, it's going to be. I have another friend.
And Taylor, you even ran on this topic, for mayor of McKinney. It's during that election, here, just a couple of years ago, where you were, your platform for the most part was, we need to start thinking about, AI and robotics and how it's going to impact the future and, infrastructure. You were talking about, power and, all the things like that, because Texas has a huge issue with, an aging power grid, huge growth, but not a ton of investment in infrastructure. And I know that it's something that you talked about quite a bit. And it's something that you, David, just, kind of touched on. And you look at countries like China, that are, they're ramping up, power generation and, that infrastructure that you were both talking about. Whereas the US, we're totally dependent on, even the transformers on telephone poles and, as part of our power grid. That's all been outsourced to Mexico and China. So, it's, it's almost like our politicians, and to bring it back to the elections, it's almost as if our politicians are either so disconnected that they don't see what's coming or don't understand what's coming, or worse, they do and they're not doing anything about it. You have to ask yourself why.
Well, I'll give you my experience running, and it was basically this. You get elected by going to a certain group of people that basically the infrastructure is already built. They already know everything, and they basically want you to say, I'll do whatever you want.
And then they'll throw their money behind you.
That's not representative governance at all.
No, but it was just a small, I guess we're not that small. We have 300,000 people in the city, but it was very clear to me, these people control, they're infiltrated in all the political parties. They know, because one reason I don't want to be attached to a political party is we don't have political parties in our city. Like, you can't be part of either. You can't run under a party. You have to be an independent. And so, but they use both parties to get the people elected they want elected. And it was very much, we have our vision. This is what we've been planning out for the last 20 years for McKinney. And I was against it. And so it was like, no, we're going to go with the guy. And so the guy that went with their vision, even though in just our city, they're building airport. The taxpayers of McKinney have to finance it, but we can't financially benefit from it. We're on the hook for it if it goes bad, but if it does good, we don't get anything from it. So 80% of our city said we don't want it. But the only candidate that was for it won the election.
Yeah. Well, why?
Because he was pushing the agenda that the higher ups wanted. And the reality was they would spend the money. He spent roughly $400,000 to become the mayor of the city, when you get paid $600 a month to be the mayor of McKinney.
So it just comes down to money. Then
wasn't that the guy that freaking owns like all the real estate, like his whole family?
Well, they just have a real estate agency, but basically, he was approached as, hey, this is what you're going to do. And he said, okay. And, there's an argument that these people know better than everybody else what's best for McKinney. We'll find out.
Well, I think we're finding out, and we've found out that way of government, that crony capitalism, doesn't work, because we're watching a mighty empire fall. And I'm not going to split hairs. America is in decline. The dollar is, through inflation and, overprinting, is going to shit. We keep getting into wars that we can't afford, that, there's really no benefit to. We're running around being the world police, flipping the bill for the UN and everything else. And then all the while we're not investing in our infrastructure. We're forcing, because of lack of legislation and, a hostile environment, we're forcing innovation overseas. We're doing all the wrong things. And again, you have to ask yourself, what is going to happen after this next election, and leading up to the election. It doesn't even matter at this point. And what are we going to see? Are we going to see leading up to the election that, gas prices and diesel prices continue to go up, thereby the price of everything else goes up? I don't know about you, but I know that, my military retirement check is not outpacing this inflation.
Nope.
What I used to get buys me half of what it used to. Mm-hmm. So this is only accelerating. So, at what point do we, the people, say enough and we demand change? Because no matter who wins, in my opinion, I'm going to give my 2 cents. I don't think it matters, up to this election. And I don't think it matters from an economic standpoint, what happens. I think a lot of this stuff that, each party worries about, no kings on the left, and, and then, a lot of the, stuff that the right is passionate about. Really, I just think it's emotional triggers that each party uses to get people to the polls. And once they have your vote, they do whatever it is that what Taylor was talking about with his experience, whoever the people that actually are keeping them in power and that are turning them into, people that are in debt, and have terrible credit in one or two times in office, they go from being broke to being multimillionaires and have multiple homes and are flying around in private jets. That's our system. And honestly,
you better believe, Mike, that those people, when they get into office and all of a sudden they, find $30 million somehow, they're going to be beholden to whoever gave them that money, however they got it, man. Yeah.
And that's what Taylor was getting at, So for the last 9 minutes, let's do closing thoughts. So David, what are your closing thoughts on all this, on the topic of kind of just the coming election?
Sure.
That's being dumped into it, and what you see happening in these markets, both TradFi, DeFi, and also crypto in general.
Yeah. So Mike, I've actually got a screen share going on. I want to take a look at a couple of charts with you guys real quick and just run through this stuff from, a financial perspective a little bit here. So this is IGV. This is software. And the thing about IGV is that this chart looks quite a lot. It looks very similar to, many a Bitcoin chart, but also a lot of the private credit items, have rolled over in this way. But if we just take a look at IGV, we've got support here, very, very close to support. Now, the interesting thing about this also is that it has recently been pretty positively correlated with Bitcoin. So you see the positive correlation basically since last April. So this correlation, if it continues and software breaks down, which it looks like it is likely to do, the reason why I say that looks likely is the more times a level of support or resistance gets tested, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, once you get past 3 tests of a level, you get into that 4th or 5th test, it becomes much more likely that that level breaks. So I expect this level of horizontal support to actually fail and for software to move sharply lower. Now, if we take a look at crude has only, one trajectory over the next couple of months, it looks like, and that is up and to the right, straight up. Now, there is an analyst that I follow who, his name's Gareth Soloway. He's great. And he's been pointing out that this big tail, this is referred to as a tail, that this big tail is actually a topping tail. And all of the price action below this high is actually just a series of lower highs. So he's actually a little bit bearish on crude. And, I think that does make sense because the moment, remember, markets price in future events, right? So the moment that there is some real progress on opening the Strait of Hormuz and removing that Iranian threat to shipping in the Strait of Hormuz permanently, the moment that becomes clear, crude is going to dump. It's going to dump fast. But right now, that is not clear. And so crude will continue to push higher. 120 is resistance. If we get above 120, though, then this thing could go to 200. It could really, really run if we get above 120. So I'm watching crude closely because of, I think, its impact on rates. So
Dude,
as,
can you imagine what would happen if it went above 120 and went up to 200? Can you imagine how that would impact global markets?
Demand destruction is what it would do. It would destroy demand. And so, what I see in rates, though, is
the price of everything. The price of food, the price of energy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the price of everything goes up because inflation expectations must be pushed higher as energy, doubles or triples. And so that means rates need to go up. And so that's what we're seeing. This is the 10-year. And so as rates have pushed higher, that has been supportive of the dollar. And, we're seeing flows into the dollar over the last several weeks here. And really the last several sessions, the dollar has pushed sharply higher at resistance. So this 100.5 level is resistance. If this is broken to the upside, the dollar could run a little bit higher here, maybe to 102 or 104. So there's definitely going to be some upward pressure on the dollar. But I think the thing to watch is crude. That's the thing to watch. And the S&P has been a little bit inversely correlated with crude recently. So if we see crude continue to push higher, I would expect that the S&P rolling over after distributing at an all-time high and breaking down below the 200-day moving average here. Remember, nothing good ever happens below the 200-day. And we've got support much further down below. So if crude keeps pumping, that should put upward pressure on rates, which means stocks down. And that's what we're seeing. If you just take a look at, Tesla breaking down below some horizontal support today. You take a look at Google breaking down below horizontal support at 300, about a week ago. You got the 200-day moving average just a little bit further down below. Nvidia breaking down below support. You've got a secondary level of support at 153. Microsoft breaking below a long-term level of trend line support. It's got some horizontal support at 344. Apple, one of the better items here, because Apple doesn't have a crazy amount of capex, AI capex spend. So Apple clinging to its 200-day moving average. Amazon, after reporting, gapped down and sitting at trend line support. And Meta looking really ugly here. Meta breaking sharply lower. You've got horizontal support at 483, and then Oracle, big software player, breaking trend line support today. So this stuff, to me, looks like you might actually be getting to a level where you could start to think about nibbling on the long side on some of those high quality names, the Mag 7 items. But be careful, because the trap door could fall out here and the S&P could be sharply lower. And that's kind of what volatility is telling me. It looks as though, the VIX the VIX at 28, that's elevated. And you should expect volatility to mean revert, but not if there's some type of shock globally as a result of crude, doubling in just a couple of months. So vol could be, about to really expand, and that would mean stocks down sharply. So,
gotcha. Yeah. Taylor, closing thoughts.
That was amazing, David. So I'm gonna go with that. But yes, we are in this environment where you just wait. That's the better way to do it, is just wait and see for things to play out, and then it's okay to miss the initial rally when it kind of starts coming back. Just wait till things kind of settle down.
Awesome.
Patience.
Yeah. No, and that's a big part of what we try to teach here, is mindset.
Michael, I got to run because
go ahead.
Event to it.
Yep.
I appreciate it, Taylor. Yeah. No, my closing thoughts is mindset. Work on your mindset. Don't be emotional. Don't chase. Don't be manipulated. These coming elections. Don't get sucked into this, left versus right, blue versus red, Democrat versus Republican. Pay attention. Do your research. Don't be lazy, because both parties are going to be pandering to their base, like they always do, tell you everything you want to hear, that they're going to fix all the problems. They're not. We need to start finding politicians, or not politicians, but people that are running for office that aren't career politicians, that are plumbers, that are electricians, that, are, retired military or whatever, that understand, the pain that people are feeling, when they go to the grocery store, that don't live in this, like royalty, that have been in Washington for 50, 60 years. Basically creating, they created themselves. You talk about no kings. We have Washington, D.C. is full of a bunch of royalty they're so disconnected from the day-to-day life that we're living out here and the struggles that we're going through just to keep gas in the tank so we can get to a job and pay 50, 40, 50% of our wages in taxes for what?
For what? Right. Yeah. Mike, did you see, so Jeff sent me something. Jeff sent me something amazing this morning, man.
Yeah.
What we've got to watch out for is these resilient, empowered truth activists restoring democracy. That's what we got to watch out for. There's a lot of those, man. So that stands for something. But Yeah, man. I think it's good. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future. I'm just not a doom and gloom type of guy. I'm just not. But we've got problems just like every country does. And hey, you know what? I would like to create some solutions to solve them.
Yeah,
So we'll
that's
see.
all I want. But and I'm not doom or gloom either, because I mean I've mitigated my lifestyle, kind of like how you mitigate financially, your investments. I've mitigated my lifestyle to where I don't really feel the impact of a lot of stuff. I you know
Look,
I
Jeff is talking shit in the chat, dude.
uh, so yeah, no, and this is my again my closing thoughts is I have no debt. Well, I have my truck, but I own my property. I'm a homesteader. I'm not reliant on the system. If I have to, I can live off the food that I can harvest from neighbors and around my property. With community gardens and wildlife and going fishing, and I can mitigate the impact that inflation and the rising fuel prices. Um, our business is work from home. I don't have to rely so much on driving my vehicle to commute to a job. This is I'm kind of getting into the sovereign soil show that we just started. This is all stuff that we're going to be talking about, is ways to mitigate your reliance on the system so that you can hopefully weather this storm. And again, we're not saying that the end is nigh, and you need to build a bunker or anything, but you need a little bit of a little bit of leaning forward and realizing that having a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months worth of food storage isn't a bad idea. Having a little bit of fuel in reserve just in case. Figuring out ways to supplement your income. Ways to supplement your food, and not relying on the infrastructure as much. Power and water, things like that. So anyway, if you want to join us later on today, Jeff is going to be doing a deep dive on a new project. I believe it's called T56.
A T52? T52? Is that what it is? Or
Yeah,
T56?
T52, something like that.
Something like, yeah, that look cool.
Yeah, he's going to be doing a deep dive on that. And he's really good at finding these early projects. So if you want to tune in for that here in about 30 minutes. And I think I'm going to go live and talk about some of the new updates that are coming out with Aerodrome, and the new platform, the new token that I was able to find, and give you some alpha on where to do your own research and find information yourself.
Awesome.
So yeah, if you want to join us, and then David, of course, will be doing his market wrap up at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, where he's just going to go over what happened in the markets that during the day. So please feel free to join us. And as always, like, follow, and share. Help us grow this channel. We're just trying to give a no hype, no bullshit, take on the crypto markets, TradFi markets, DeFi markets, so that you can be as well informed as possible. We don't hype projects. We don't get paid to talk about projects. We're just going to give you the real deal here. So if you want the truth, this is where you find it. David, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Till next time, Veteran Crypto out.
Peace.